Alrighty, Footy Rants, we're back. Round 17 review. And well, if last week was a round of close games, we've seen anything but this week with a number of big scorelines racked up by a couple of different teams, and we'll have a look at the ladder at the moment. So we still see the Melbourne Storm back in the winners' circle this week after a bit of a shock loss to the Roosters last week, after probably doing most of the hard yards. They only sort of switched off the back end of the game. So yeah, they streak ahead back to a 2-win lead at top on 28 points. Then we've got a bit of a bottleneck up in second place now. So we've got Cronulla, Manly, and the Roosters. So Manly were the big movers. Probably unlucky not to be holding second place there. So we see with for and against the Sharkies on 85 plus and Manly on 83. I don't think many people saw the Sharks putting a scoreline like that on the Roosters, so they probably had Manly penciled in to take second if they did get the win. But it wasn't enough in the end. Tied for fifth place, we have the Broncos and Cowboys on 22 points, so that's your fifth and sixth position. And seventh and eighth, we've got the Dragons and Parramatta on 20 points. Now that gap still lingers outside the 8, so you've got Penrith and the Warriors having both lost on the weekend, stuck on 16 points. So they're now 2 wins outside of the 8. So a little bit of a breather now in the top 8. A lot of hard work to do, but some opportunities coming the way with Rabbitohs finally chalking up that win. So they join Penrith on 16 points now, and then we've got the Raiders and the Dogs struggling now on 14 points, and they've had a very similar season, just failing to get over the line despite having a number of close games. Particularly the Raiders. I mean, you look there, the for and against 23 plus. They're still in the green, and they're sitting 3 wins outside the 8. And you have a look, Parramatta's inside the 8 there, and they're negative 35. So yeah, outside of the Bulldogs in 13th place, you've got the Titans also on 14 points, and the Tigers broke the bottom of the table deadlock, and that will almost certainly guarantee them a bit of clearance from the wooden spoon stakes, especially with the Bulldogs coming up against Newcastle this week. So the Dogs will be desperate to get a win there and try and cling on to any sort of final hopes that they may have. But yeah, look, Penrith and the Warriors really didn't do themselves any favours on the weekend as far as sneaking into that top 8. And with Parramatta firing opportunistic game against the Dogs, they've really sort of leveraged themselves to a point where they'll be happy to build some momentum on. Alrighty, let's dive into some highlights. So the first game, as we just mentioned, we had Parramatta up against the Dogs. And that's exactly what it was early on. It was a dogfight, and a lot of people were sort of expecting Parramatta to come out and put some points on and win 13 plus. I'm pretty sure was the most highly sought after market. But you can never write the Dogs off in just making things difficult. Like even last week with their loss to the Warriors, they still made things difficult. Only lost by 7 points, and this week they lost by 1. So we saw early on here that Montoya gets 10 in the bin, and they actually defended things really, really well. Maintained enough possession so that they actually didn't leak any tries. But this little piece of individual brilliance here to see the first try open up with Bevan French. I mean, he doesn't even get good purchase on that kick, and still has enough speed to catch that awkward bounce and capitalises. But the man that I want to give raps to in this match, I have to say, is Mitchell Moses. I know I give him a hard time week in, week out, but he was markedly improved. His defensive decisions they just presented a lot more certainty. He shot out of the line when he needed to shoot out of the line, especially when they did try and catch him napping or try and generate some sort of number split on that right defensive edge for Parramatta. But he only came up with 2 missed tackles in comparison to his halves partner, Corey Norman, who came up with 6. And as we've seen late in the game here, the Dogs were very much in it. We see there's 12 minutes to go. Frawley comes on off the bench, and and did well, but it was probably more that management towards the back end of the game that lacked for the Dogs. There was a play there where Frawley kicked one dead, which caused 7 tackles set, and then we go to Golden Point, and Moses ices the game there. So a few special mentions for the Parramatta side. I thought Nathan Brown was massive in that forward pack. Obviously missing James Graham, the Bulldogs. It was really important that Parramatta side capitalised on that, and I thought they did to a certain degree. Nathan Brown ended up with 28 hit-ups, 246 metres and 43 tackles. Cameron King was also solid in his first game of NRL in about 2 years since getting a start with the Cowboys. And I thought he just did enough. His defence was sound. He was pretty crisp out of 9 as far as his passing goes. You can just tell he's just an out and out 9. He's not someone that's sort of filling a role who sort of plays in and around the halves, as we've seen with Brown for the Sharks. But yeah, the big loss was in the middle for the Dogs, and once they don't get that early sort of sense of momentum, the Doggies, they start to play very, very laterally. Even someone like a Josh Reynolds, you'll see him constantly, he'll start probing on that right edge. But what those outside backs didn't do from the Dogs is there was no one changing direction. There was no one pulling underneath him, giving him options where he could potentially probe and take the line on himself, or hold up a defender or two and give them some opportunity back on the inside. And anytime he did try to do that, there was times where the bloke coming back under wasn't really expecting the ball and he'd fucking drop it. So yeah, it must be so frustrating with Hasler to have the team that he does have. Whilst they're not a superstar halves outfit, there's definitely enough talent in that team to be getting the job done. And we've seen him take it to the best teams. Whilst it was an under strength Sharks lineup a few weeks ago, they only went down by 1 point, and we got to remember that they had their own players in Clemmer and Morris missing as well. So I think it was all pretty fair at that point in time, and they still had Valentine Holmes, the Sharkies. So we know that they can take it to them, but the fact that they just keep getting rubbed out in these tight situations, it's got to be a concern for Hasler. And if you turn those tight situations around, that's when you're going to be having those strong seasons. We look at teams like the Cowboys and the number of wins that they've had by less than 4 points. I can think of at least 4 occasions where that's happened for the Cowboys. So they could be well outside the 8 if they don't convert those wins. I know they won their first 2 games by 1 point. So, quite easily. And they've won, last week was by 2 points. And yeah, so I think the difference between the good teams and the great teams are those who are able to finish. And at the moment, the Dogs aren't having one of those years where the chips are falling their way. So, yeah, unfortunate times, but again, you've got to give pats on the back. I thought the creativity that we said was going to be presented by Parramatta would get them over the line. I thought it might have been by a bit more than 1 point, but hey, a win's a win. Moving into the second game, we had the Titans and the Dragons. Well, this was just the Anthony Don show, wasn't it? So he was the sole try scorer for the Gold Coast Titans. Ended up with a hat-trick. And the players that were going to have to stand up in this occasion, it was always going to be a battle of the forwards. And James and Wallace did exactly that. 150 metres running each. And that definitely laid the platform. And I think it was sort of an ebby and flowy game. Each side had their opportunity as far as with waves of possession, but it was just the Gold Coast who capitalised. I mean, outstanding individual effort. This has got to be one of the tries of the year. A one-handed juggle. He's been taken off the ball, so you could argue there was a penalty to be had there as well. But the combination that Hurrell and Jared Hayne are creating for that right edge Titans attack, it's something that's starting to gain a little bit of momentum over the last couple of weeks. So, if they can start to grease that groove and figure out what their core sort of game plan is, they can get back on their winning ways that we've seen about 6 weeks ago. So yeah, don't write the Titans off yet. I don't think they'll play finals footy this year. I think they've probably left their run a little bit too late, but hey, you can never say never. There's still 9 rounds to go, so anything can happen yet. But I think where the Dragons sort of struggled was just their creativity. Again, we've seen once they had to make the reshuffle, we see Frizzell go off there, and Dugan followed him once they had to make that shuffle with Mann. I'm sure they would have been looking to develop some consistency around a new halves outfit of Widdop and Mann, and having to shove him back out on the edge and then bring McCrone back off the bench was sort of like, well, we're not really able to solve the problem that we wanted to solve in the first place. Otherwise, we would have just gone with that original halves setup. So, yeah, I felt like the Dragons sort of just gave up a little bit once Dugan and Frizzell were lost to the game, and it was pretty disappointing to see. You know, they've been really lacking that consistent effort that we've seen in the first 6 to 8 rounds, and it's not to say that their forward pack is dwindling or lacking in any more performance. Probably not quite as potent in this game, but I thought Tarek Sims was still phenomenal. It was just this discipline here, you know, giving away cheap penalties and allowing the Gold Coast to pick off easy points. Like we see the last 4 points for the Titans came off penalty goals. So if they clean up those little things, you know, it's only a 6-point game. But even though there was that 6-point margin, you just felt as though the Dragons didn't even really believe that they were in that match. So, you know, I think it was a good little gutsy win for the Titans, and they sort of just did what they had to do to get the 2 points over a team that's cemented well in the 8. And if the Dragons aren't careful, you know, they're going to find themselves falling out the back end of that. And it would be a real shame, because it's been a massive effort for McGregor and his men so far this season. And to see them miss out now would be not only a poor result for the club and for the game, but more importantly for their fans who've ridden them, you know, as hard as any fans that you have in the game. You know, they don't come too much more loyal than the Dragons. So I think for the good of the game, it'd be good to see a team that struggled so much last year turn around their fortunes, and the fact that they're going to have Ben Hunt there next year. I want to see him get some more wins under the belt. Moving into the second game of Friday night, well, what a shellacking this was. The Melbourne Storm up against the Brisbane Broncos, and we spoke about in the preview how good the Melbourne Storm's record in Brisbane was, and geez, they didn't really leave anything to chance here. I said I sensed a bit of an ambush. Whether I anticipated a 42-12 scoreline, I'm not sure, but you can't say that the Broncos didn't have their opportunities, but I think that the Melbourne Storm just proved what an outstanding team they have. Once the Bronx lost Josh Maguire there to a really nasty head knock, he really wasn't well, and you could tell the way that he was trying to fight that, it probably gave him away even more. The thing that impressed me most about the Melbourne Storm was just not only their speed of execution, but just the number of variations they have on so many different plays. The try that impressed me most was Curtis Scott's second try. I think we'll see it shortly. I believe it's still in this half. But yeah, Curtis Scott's second try, the way that Cooper Cronk plays straight in front of Felice Kafusi, it was something amazing to watch. And you see him strip that number there. They didn't even need Billy Slater. That's how well they performed it. But when it got to 14-0, it was interesting. I think Bellamy, once Hunt goes over for this one, he probably thinks, shit, we can't afford to let this Broncos team get it back to 14-12 because we've just given them too much confidence. But when you've got finishers like Vunivalu there, that just shows desperation and a backing of your skill, you know, just doing your job and doing the fundamentals right. But yeah, they get it back to 20 points to 12, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, we've got a game on our hands here. But then for whatever reason, the Broncos just let the foot off the gas, and we just seen what a talented side this Storm side is, even when it's not at full strength. To be honest, I wouldn't even bring Chase Blair back. I think he probably will, just simply because he's been there, done that. He's quite a senior player in that outfit now. But, mate, the blokes that have been filling in whilst he's been absent have been absolutely phenomenal. Curtis Scott, in particular. This one here, look at that. We'll see a replay. Just the way Cooper Cronk plays the ball to line, they think it's going to Kafusi, just draws that player in. But the fact that Kafusi knew that was the option to play in front and to not catch that ball, because he had every right to try and catch that ball. And then we just seen this rampant passage of play. And it wasn't even just play, I guess. It was just the dominance of possession. The possession stakes were close to 60-40, but the Broncos didn't help themselves with a 59% completion rate. Anytime you afford the Melbourne Storm that amount of football, and then the football that you have, you only complete that well. I think that final try to Addo Card just summed up their night. There was no real respect for any sort of game plan in the back end of the game when shit wasn't working for them. And I think losing Josh Maguire early really made that middle super brittle, to be honest. When you've got forwards like Bromwich, McLean, and Glasby running around, they just made them pay. And there was just little fundamental errors there. There was a time when Benji Marshall went to bring Sam Thaiday under and he dropped it cold. So, just when you're probing, you really need to bind together as a team. You can't be affording to stand off, and as soon as you get to a position where you're like, oh, what the fuck is this guy doing? And he's on your team and you're asking yourself those sort of questions, it's not really going to end well. It shows that there's no sort of cohesion, that you're not making things up off the fly, which I think the Melbourne Storm do quite the opposite of. They have their set system and structure that even when there is a little bit of chaos, they've got something quite basic that they can get back to and execute on with variation, and we've seen them do that. But 3 tries in 6 minutes, and it was great to see Cameron Smith get over the line. Absolute champion of a player, and any time that he runs for over 100 metres, I think he ended up with something like 13 hit-ups, 111 metres. Any time that Cam Smith's getting double digits of hit-ups, that ruck's pretty fucking messy, because he's not normally the guy that gets out and gets tackled. He's probing, passing, kicking, and to get that 4-pointer, I think it was just an exclamation on a great performance by the Melbourne Storm. And we're about to get into the Sharks game now, but just seeing those two teams again, you start scratching your head and you're like, who else is going to beat these two sides? I mean, aside from the fact that where they finish may mean that they have to play each other to get to the big dance, that's the only real way that I can see them not playing each other again. And I don't think there'd be any other really better result to see that go to the finale again. Even as a Cowboys supporter, I'd be more than happy to see a Storm Sharks rematch. Alrighty, so as we were just speaking about the Sharks and the Roosters, I don't think I could sort of sense that coming for the Bronx, but I definitely didn't see this coming for the Roosters. 44 points to 12. Again, 60% of possession in favour of the Sharks, 89% completions, which is well up on what they've been tossing up in recent times, the Sharkies. And the Roosters weren't terrible. I think that was probably the more pleasing thing for the Sharks, just their level of execution. Look at the way that they stripped the numbers there and just developed a 3-on-1 out of nothing, and Jack Bird still had a lot of work to do to earn his merits there. They just developed pressure and the big waves of momentum again. We've seen Fafita and Gallen stand up. They were absolutely sort of belittled by that Manly forward pack last week. Gallen had his quietest game of the season, but the game was being played at such a frenetic pace. I think it was just a matter of the Sharks got a better grip of that momentum. You got to 14-12 and it was a good old tussle. But they just rode that wave of momentum, and we've seen Valentine Holmes there, all class, working back up in the middle. But it was a real sort of balance. I think that's the word I want to use for not only the Sharkies here, but also pretty much every team that had big wins on the weekend. So Cronulla, the Storm, and the Rabbitohs. It was just a balanced effort from the whole team. It was a team performance. Having Fafita and Gallen lay that platform in the style that they did, and then the execution of these outside backs. Every single outside back scored for the Sharks, and that's all you ask. So it means that the forwards are getting the early momentum, winning the ruck. Then your halves are creating the options on the fringes, and your outside backs are executing. when you break it down like that, rugby league's a super simple game, and that's all the Sharks did. We've seen there it was a 2-point ball game, 38 minutes in, and so you know to go on and put another 30 unanswered points on. Hats off to Flanagan and his men. They really stood up, and what a way to bounce back from a super disappointing loss. I heard him come out and say he wanted a bit more focus put in on the Sharks jersey from his Origin stars. He felt like their performance had been detracted a little bit with a distraction from Origin. And you can't knock the effort of this bloke, Luke Lewis. 2 weeks in a row, he's made that exact same play, where he's gone the length. We got to remember this is not a young man. If I'm not mistaken, Luke Lewis is somewhere in the vicinity of 34 years old. It was something great to watch, and to see Ricky Latelli continue to go from strength to strength over the last 18 months, and the fact that he's a Queenslander, well, you just know that we've got the depth there. It's almost just when you think you've got Queensland on the ropes, they sort of just keep coming. But yeah, it was really pleasing to see again. You want to watch that entertaining footy, and whilst you'd love to see two absolute heavyweights of the competition go toe to toe and make a fist of it, it wasn't like it was a bad game. It wasn't super frustrating to watch the Roosters. They like I said from the top, they weren't terrible. The Sharks just executed on a level well and truly above. Whereas I felt that the Broncos really did fall apart. So I don't think this score was necessarily reflective. I think they just lost a whole heap of momentum, the Roosters, and there wasn't a whole lot of creativity and go forward that was able to be had from the Roosters middles, especially when you got a bloke like Jake Friend ended up with 65 tackles. That's fucking disgustingly amazing effort from a guy his size. Yes, he's a little ball of muscle, but yeah, in translation to that, only ends up with 2 carries. You know, so you want to see your dummy half finding that balance between, you know, you expect every dummy half to rattle up 40 plus tackles in the modern game. But to only have 2 hit-ups, that's not necessarily any fault of his own. You've emptied your gas tank, and you're not going to be looking. So, you know, he came up with an error towards the end of the game, and I think that was purely just based off the fact that he was rooted. So I guess that, again, it sort of puts a little bit of pressure back on Robinson. It's like, you've got a freak of a kid coming through the ranks in Connor Watson, and he's only getting 11 minutes. I don't see the point. You know, the game was well and truly gone with 11 minutes to go. Why aren't you giving the kid a crack when, you know, the Sharks shoot out to 20-12? Like, let's go. We need some sort of change here. We need some sort of vibrancy in and around the ruck, and that's where we're losing it. Yes, you're sort of giving yourself up a little bit because you're a smaller body, but at least you've got some energy there. And, you know, if worst case he fucking falls on his face, you just rip him off. And I know that sort of counteracts the argument a little bit, because, you know, you don't want to be putting a little guy on and burning up 2 interchanges. But, you know, you live and die by the sword. I think at least then, you know, maybe it's not 20-12, but if it's 26-12, well, fuck, you've got nothing to lose now. It's make or break. So, you know, I'm still baffled as to why Watson's only getting the limited game time that he is getting, and it's no fault of his own that he's looking for another home, and it sounds like the Tigers are going to win that race by the sound of it. So big raps again to Fafita and Gallen. I thought Brown and Paulo did enough, evidently, on the scoreboard, did enough in the middle. You know, there was no sort of fundamental fuck-ups, but I think that sort of probably comes back to the momentum that every other forward was sort of giving them. It would have been interesting to see if it was a little bit closer and a bit tighter, how they would have responded. But yeah, outside of that, you know, when you've got a full team performance, it's just a day that works at the office. Alrighty, Manly Warriors. Geez, what a scrappy game, and just disappointing again. I know we say it week in, week out. You probably got the Warriors. You probably group a little cluster. The Warriors, Penrith, Canberra, and Parramatta. They're probably the 4 teams that sort of toss up this sort of performance to go from 16-0 in the lead, the Warriors, and absolutely collapse. You just sort of knew once Manly fought back the possession, it was really, really trying conditions in Perth. You know, it was really wet. But yeah, they were just going off like a frog in a sock. We see there, the second try, and it was only the 7th minute, so they went bang, bang, bang. But they're probably the starts at times where you really get concerned as a Warriors fan. It's like, okay, now we need to defend this for longer, and they sort of get in that defensive mentality rather than like, well, no, this is just working for us, so let's keep coming. Don't go away from what's working. But yeah, Api Coruscant was the man who drove all of this, and the finishes of Tom Trbojevic. So yeah, those two guys alone. I mean, along as with the execution of Cherry Evans and Blake Green was they hadn't gone away from what they've been doing in previous weeks. But yeah, we've got Trbojevic ended up with 20 hit-ups, 183 metres, 2 line breaks, a try assist and 2 tries. Like, you can't ask much more of a kid who's only burst onto the NRL scene a couple of years ago. And geez, you know he's going to play some rep footy at some point. It's just it's a matter of time. But yeah, it's a shame to see Cherry Evans. You know, he put on another really stellar performance for Manly, and you know at well, it's now midday, so the Origin side's got named a couple of hours ago, and yeah, Ben Hunt's been selected in front of him, which is just baffled me. You know, the amount of options that they had to choose from, but. You know, obviously Walters is aware of a specialised skill set that Hunt brings to that side, and that's the way he's lent. But I guess the positive is now that Cherry Evans really puts his head down, and now that they've cemented a top 3 spot, it's on his shoulders now to make sure that this team fires, stays well cemented in that top 4, and goes on to produce a result that reflects their position at the moment. I'd hate to see him sort of just burn out the back end of this competition. They deserve to be up there. Trent Barrett's done a phenomenal job. Again, we've said it a couple of times now of a few of those players that were sort of left to dry from other clubs, you know, like your Sirenens and your Wintersteins and your Akili Uates. They've sort of come back for a second wind, almost Storm-esque. But, you know, you see Nickel Klokstad. He goes over for that try in the 68th minute, so there was still, it might have been the 65th, but they still had time to win this game. I think that was the really disappointing thing on Coach Kearney's behalf, that they still got within range. Like, whilst they were down by 10 points, they score that last try. It's a 4-point ball game. Like, it's fucking game on. If that's not enough to get you excited to be like, okay, we can just wipe, you know, this middle portion of the game where we've completely switched off and get away with the 2 competition points, well, then that's just a conversation on how we can make that even better next week, as opposed to, oh, fuck, now we're still chasing wins. Especially because they were starting to build that little bit of momentum. They'd won the last couple, and, you know, 3 in a row, your tails are up. But, you know, it's back to the drawing board now, and when a team like the Warriors deflates, they deflate hard. So, yeah, whilst it was a little bit of a chink in the Manly armour, they just weren't quite up to speed at the start of the game. But you know, they sort of took control once they were back in. Even though it was a 4-point ball game, you know, you can that first 10 minutes, and they're definitely probably a 20-point better side than the Warriors, and they themselves would know that and would have expected that. You know, that I'm sure that's a standard that they would have loved to have held themselves to, but. You know, again, we go back to the very top of the podcast when we're talking about a team like the Dogs. The teams that are going to finish in that top 4 are the teams that convert those tight games into victories and keep ticking that 2 points week after week. Excuse me. So I believe that's 5 on the trot for Manly now. So they're well and truly up in those rankings. Into the last game of Super Saturday. Wow, I don't think too many people really gave the Cowboys too much of a chance post Thurston, especially to go back to back. I would imagine that'd probably be one of the first times, if not the first time, that the Cowboys have ever gone back to back victories without Jonathan Thurston. And I think it's a credit to, you know, just the circumstances that they've been able to, you know, just sort of deal with. It's like, okay, well, we can't change anything. We've missed Matt Scott since the start of the year. Pat Kafusi, who was meant to step into that role, then got injured. You know, they've been dealing with injuries all through the year. And the fact that you've still got someone with the potential and the ability of a Kalen Ponga still sitting back in 20s that you can bring out at your disposal anytime. I still think that the Cowboys are a threat. Are they a premiership threat? If I'm being completely honest, probably not. But are they going to be a finals threat? For sure. They can definitely take it to any of these top four teams on their day. And the fact that you've got a new halves pairing with Tamari Martin and Morgan, and they score 4 tries between them, and the way that Michael Morgan just managed that team and led them around the park. His short kicking game of recent times, in the last 3 weeks, I was highly critical of him in the early part when Thurston just recently got injured just after the Anzac Test. But I don't know, it's almost like you get him into camp, get him back around those high-level players again, even though he plays with one of the best week in, week out. But you just put him in a group of those high-level players, and it's like he just ironed out all these bugs again, and he just figured out those little areas of his game where he's like, oh, fuck, why was I doing that? Let's try these little things. And just building that confidence and knowing that he can and stop questioning himself and just fucking do it. You can just tell that he's not second-guessing himself anymore, and he's just grabbing the bull by the horns and just looking to get his involvement up. I think that's been the biggest plus on Michael Morgan's side, is he's just doing more. The game here, if I'm Ricky Stewart, I'm so fucking dirty on my team. The amount of games, again, like we said, that they've lost by super tight margins, and the fact that they still have a positive for and against, something's got to change. Their halves, Aiden Caesar and Blake Austin, they're just not coming up with the right opportunities the right options at the right times. If I'm looking at their game plan, not even their game plan, because I'm sure that it wouldn't be Ricky Stewart's game plan, but the way that they are executing their momentum at the moment, they've got these big fuck off forwards that get them on the front foot early on, generate all this momentum, and then you've got kids like this, Kotrick, and then you've got Leilua and Rapana, who come in and do extra work and create opportunities like this, and quite often score tries like this, but it's not enough. They shouldn't have to be the ones that are going in there to create those opportunities. Your halves should be the one getting you around the field, getting you to the right points of play so that you can execute on those things that you work on week in, week out. Not allowing a brand new halves combination to throw up a fucking offload, a no-look offload like this. Like, there's defenders around there. Get the fuck in there and do your job. Yeah, really, really disappointing. And then you see this shit. I mean, if I'm Ricky Stewart, I would have told BJ Leilua to fuck off. Like, go play at another fucking club if you're going to put your head up your ass. Like, you would have been more effective. Yeah, it was really, really frustrating to see because I know all too well, having been involved with teams over the years that have a whole heap of potential, and then you've just got one guy who can change a game for better or worse, and more often than not, you're going to put your money on worse. And yeah, that would definitely go on one of the low light reels for BJ Leilua, and the commentary team summed it up perfectly, and that's what's going to keep him out of rep jerseys. And I mean, he can go denying things all he wants post footy about, I knew deep down that I was fucking this and I was better than this cunt and whatever. But at the end of the day, they just look like better blokes. And if you're a better bloke, you're going to go a long way. You look at someone like Josh Jackson. He gets about his work. He's a no-frills footballer. There's probably about another 3 or 4 back rowers in the competition that you could put in there highly competently at that origin level. But he's probably just a fucking decent bloke and someone that people like to be around. So, just being a genuine person goes a long way. I know I've sort of set myself up there, but yeah, it was just really frustrating to see because, and I mean, this is a team that's versing the club that I support. And for me to get upset about a team that lost, yeah, it's just dumb. It's just unnecessary. Yes, they lost Hodgson, and he was evident in a lot of that calming effect around the ruck. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. But they absolutely imploded. The Cowboys are doing what the Cowboys need to do at the moment. When you don't have a Thurston, that all they've done in the last 2 weeks is starve opposition of the football and just make sure that they complete well. That's all they've done. So they had 59% possession and 86% completion. You look at the stats last week against Penrith. Penrith should have won that game, but the Cowboys just held the ball longer. So it's pretty simple. Whilst we don't have the things that are going our way, if we can just hold the footy for longer, just build a little bit of pressure, which is what's happening now off the back of Morgan's kicking game, we've got the guys that are going to be able to come up with the plays. Kyle Felt's going to jump over any other winger in the competition. That battle between him and Kotrick was phenomenal. I found it thoroughly entertaining. You got guys like Cohen Hess that are bursting up the middle. You got guys like Cooper, Taumalolo, there's still damage there. That's why I think that they're still, you can't write them off. But the Raiders have all those answers. They do have all the answers there. They should have won that game, especially at home. There's something like 25 degrees of turnaround between the temperature of Townsville than it was in Canberra. Talk about getting thrown in a fishbowl and getting out of your comfort zone. Those guys training that week in, week out. It's why it's so hard to win in Townsville when you get that sweltering humidity up there. The forwards are just used to it. So, they really let one go there. Moving into the Sunday footy, Knights up against the Tigers. It was the battle of the bottom, and it was pretty evident in the way that we've seen Trent Hodkinson there. Got one of his rare starts for the season, and didn't really deliver too much. But again, it just shows that the Knights they're not putting together full games of footy. We've seen them absolutely obliterate the Dragons in the first half, switch off, and they just did the exact same but in reverse this week. 20 unanswered points in that first half, but then 13-12 in the second half. So, it just shows that they're more than capable of going with a side like the Tigers. That's where they're both on the same point in the ladder. A bloke like Danny Levi's obviously trying his hardest up the guts week in, week out, and creating opportunities as he should. But even with the return of Buren and the experience that he brings at that sort of level for a club like Newcastle, it wasn't enough. Luke Brooks had his running shoes on the weekend, and he just created enough opportunities for his outside men. I felt like the Newcastle Knights could have executed a little bit crisper. Luke Brooks still came up with 7 missed tackles, so it's not to say there weren't opportunities to be had on the edge, but yeah, just fucking up fundamental parts of the game. You've seen there, Rostog sort of takes one dead, and that's a training drill, that, and the way they stripped the numbers, it was disappointing to see. The momentum that Newcastle had been building over the last month. I think losing that game to the Dragons probably dented the confidence of Newcastle a little bit more than what we anticipated. And perhaps, coming up against the Tigers and being favourites for the first time in however long, maybe they thought, oh, hey, we're just going to go out and win this. And maybe they played the game in their head before they were allowed to. But, it was too little too late. They just generated enough momentum in that first half, the Tigers, and their finish was real poor. And to let another one in there was just icing on the cake. And yeah, it was interesting to see Brooks and Moses sort of step up and have their time to shine over the weekend. The last drubbing of the weekend, we had the Souths Rabbitohs up against the Penrith Panthers. And unfortunately, the team that I do enjoy watching, the Penrith Panthers, they just really got done with a whole heap of momentum. It was all Penrith in the first portion of this game. We'll see in a second that they get that early penalty there, but then Matt Moylan creates a beautiful play down this passage here. So Zelezniak gets a great offload back on and good support as he's used to doing in that fullback role. So yeah, up until this point, about almost 20 minutes into the game, it was all Penrith. And then they try and attack this right edge again. I don't think that... Oh yeah, it will be just after this. So this melee comes, players get sent. It was a joke, but that's the stance that they've taken, and I guess one each, fair's fair, move on. But yeah, it was a little bit laughable. But this one here, a wayward pass, and this is where the game turns. So we see here the 17th minute, whatever you want to call it, and they just couldn't regroup, the Penrith side. It was just it turned into the Alex Johnson show. This was the first one. He actually ends up going on to score 5 tries in 41 minutes. I would have to think that is a record. I believe that's a record for Souths. I think they said that the last person to score 4 tries for Souths was Dylan Walker in the grand final year. But then, yeah, it was just the execution. Reynolds had his kicking game back, which is what he'd been lacking for a number of weeks. So who knows? This might be a little spate that we see the Rabbitohs played back into some form. We see another Reynolds kick here. So there's 2 so far, and Johnson's the benefactor of it. But yeah, it was just rampaging. Just rampaging. There's another pass. from Walker. And just good support around the ruck. Sam Burgess was at his best again. That's a great rugby league try. But yeah, so you see that again. It's just these little lapses in all the big score lines over the weekend. So from the 340-point score lines that we've seen, it was only about a period, apart from the Broncos, which was catastrophic, 6 minutes. Is it 11-minute period where they scored 4 tries here, the Rabbitohs. So just small portions of the game can absolutely turn something on its head. And yeah, they come up with 18 offloads, so 14 more, so 18-4 with the offload outlets, but the damage was already done. The momentum was set in play, and look at that no looker from Reynolds. It was something to behold. This was probably Reynolds' best game of the year, and if he can keep teams guessing with the am I going to kick short, am I going to kick long, am I going to kick that sort of medium range, that trying to look for that back rower centre, that can still cause plenty of headaches coming the back end of the year. You look at they definitely don't have the strike of someone like a Melbourne Storm as far as outside backs, but I mean, we've seen here Alex Johnson, and he's quite capable. He scored 5 tries. Yes, he's just sort of finished like any good winger should. But you've got an experience in John Sutton, you've got a Robbie Farah there, you've got a kicking game of Reynolds, you've got a Burgess, you've got 2 Burgess brothers outside of that on when they're not bloody all greased up with their hands and dropping balls, they're really, really good. But if anything, I think all in all, it's probably more a testament of how good this competition is. We've had a team like Penrith that's just been on a rampage of late, aside from their little stutter against an understrength Cowboys last week. I didn't think it was going to do their confidence too badly. But, coming off the back of a struggling Souths team and an inconsistent Souths team at that, I thought they would have bounced back quite comfortably. And I actually thought that the same scoreline might have been evident, but it would have been in favour of Penrith. So, if anything, I think it's a big rap to the level of competition that we get exposed to every week at the NRL, and anyone's a chance on any given weekend. But I guess if there's anything that I sort of want to draw on with Penrith, it was the debut of Katoa, the 9 who came in late for Mitch Rain. I thought he brought great energy and enthusiasm and aggression. He got stuck right into Sam Burgess there at one point, and I think he was actually the one who started all that push and shove that ended up having Sam Burgess and Zelezniak sin bin. So, it was thoroughly entertaining, the game still. I think that's what made probably most of those games, the fact that probably more importantly the Sharks and Roosters one. That was still an entertaining game, even though the Roosters were on the back foot, but it was just waves of momentum. The 2 of those 3 games, so the performance from Penrith and the performance from the Roosters, I didn't think they were terrible. They just got done with a whole heap of execution and run of momentum. It was just that Reynolds would kick and Johnston would score. So sometimes teams just have their day. I think it's well and truly within the realms that it could be a Cleary and Zelezniak on the opposite side. So, I don't think it's panic stations just yet for Penrith, but, it's definitely halted their momentum. They're probably expected to win these last 2 games. So yeah, it's back to the drawing board, and it really makes for an interesting time coming into Origin period again, and who's going to capitalise on these victories. But yeah, super important wins for the Sharks and Cowboys who get the bye during Origin period, and both teams have really stood up. Actually, throw the Storm into the mix there too. They've really stood up during this Origin period, and without their stars getting a number of wins that probably weren't overly expected of them. So they get their just deserves, and it was essentially a 4-point win on the weekend for those 2 clubs who get their break this weekend. Righty, gang. So yeah, we know the Origin sides now for game 3. The Blues side is unchanged, so they've had the same team every game for the whole series for the first time since '96, and the Queensland side, they brought in Munster, which was, it was pretty well expected that he would come in and fill that role, but the more unexpected side of Ben Hunt coming into the half. So not sure whether Morgan is going to start at 6 and Hunt will come off the bench, or vice versa. It will be interesting to see what they end up deciding on there. But the game management and leadership that Morgan displayed on the weekend definitely didn't do himself any disfavours, and probably earns his rite of passage. So yeah, all will be revealed. So until later in the week, where we'll preview just the few games. Obviously another shortened round this week with Origin Stars away. I will speak to you on Friday when we dive into everything round 18. Alright, gang. Again, footy rants, always ranting, always will be ranting from now on. Enjoy.